Have you ever noticed something strange? The longer you're alone, the stronger you feel. Not weaker, not lonelier, just more grounded, more focused, more like yourself. At first, being alone feels uncomfortable. There's no one to talk to, no schedule to follow, no background noise to drown out the silence. Just you and your thoughts. But then something starts to shift. The silence that once felt empty begins to feel full of clarity, full of answers, full of presence. Most people never reach that point. They run from loneliness. They distract themselves with constant noise, TV, social media, shallow conversation, anything to avoid being alone with themselves. But a rare few learn to lean into it. They don't just survive solitude, they grow in it. They become sharper, more self-aware, less reactive to the chaos of the world. These are the people who quietly build real strength. Not the kind that comes from power or status, but the kind that comes from knowing who you are, when no one else is around to tell you. And history remembers men like that. Beethoven lost his hearing and withdrew from the world. But in that silence, he composed music that still moves hearts today. Nietzsche walked alone for miles each day, wrestling with his thoughts and reshaped philosophy forever. Emily Dickinson lived a life of seclusion, barely leaving her home. But her poems reached deeper into the human soul than most people ever dare to look. These people didn't fear solitude. They used it as fuel, as a forge. And what came out was brilliance. One philosopher understood this better than most, Arthur Schopenhauer. He believed that solitude wasn't a sign of failure or social dysfunction. It was a sign of strength and even of intelligence. He once wrote, "The more intelligent a person is, the more they prefer to be alone." Why? Because the intelligent seek meaning, not noise. They don't need constant validation to know who they are. They don't chase the crowd, because they know the crowd rarely leads anywhere worth going. To Schopenhauer, solitude wasn't something to fix. It was something to face. And for the right kind of person, it becomes a source of deep inner power. So what happens when someone not only accepts solitude, but learns to thrive in it? They become dangerous, not in a way that harms others, but in a way that makes them impossible to control. Most people spend their lives chasing approval. They shape their opinions to fit the crowd. They measure their worth by how others see them. They fear standing alone because they haven't yet learned to trust their own voice. But the person who spent time in real solitude, they've built something stronger. They no longer seek constant validation. They don't need the noise of others to feel alive. They've faced the silence and found clarity in it. That's where true independence begins. Because when you're alone with your thoughts, you start asking questions others are too distracted to ask. You begin to develop a mind that's not easily swayed, a mind that sees beyond the surface. And with that kind of inner clarity, you stop reacting to the world and start responding to it on your own terms. That's what makes a person like this feel dangerous. Not because they want control, but because they can't be controlled. The truth is, someone who's learned to stand alone isn't easy to fool. They've made tough decisions in silence. They've questioned themselves, wrestled with doubt, and learned to listen to their own judgment. That kind of person isn't swayed by flashy headlines, peer pressure, or loud opinions. They don't need a crowd to feel confident in their choices. And when someone can't be influenced by noise, they become something rare, stable, clear-headed, and deeply resilient. That's what dangerous really means in this context. Not violent, not rebellious, but unshakable. People like this live outside the reach of manipulation. They don't panic when others do. They don't need a leader to tell them what to think. They've already met their fears in the silence of solitude and survived. They don't follow the herd, and that in today's world makes them very hard to predict and even harder to control. Creativity doesn't come from chaos, it comes from stillness. Some of the most creative minds in history weren't the loudest in the room. They were the ones who spent the most time alone. Psychologists say highly creative people often lean toward introversion, not because they dislike others, but because their best ideas come when the world goes quiet. In solitude, there's space. Space to think, to imagine, to follow a thought all the way to its end. It's in that quiet where something powerful happens. Your mind unfolds. You stop performing and start exploring. And that's when creativity shows up. Being alone doesn't mean being isolated. It means freedom to explore your own mind without outside noise drowning it out. In a world full of distractions, solitude is a kind of superpower, a rare space where your thoughts are truly your own. And that's what sets some people apart. They don't wait for permission to think. They don't wait to be told who they are. They use solitude to build something most never do. A self that's grounded, clear, and free. The truth is, some of the strongest minds don't need an audience. They're not driven by likes, followers, or applause. They're driven by something deeper, an internal compass that doesn't swing with public opinion. When you're alone long enough, you stop needing to agree with everyone. You stop fearing disapproval. You realize the crowd doesn't always know where it's going. And in that moment, something changes. You stop living reactively and start living intentionally. That's when a person becomes quietly powerful. Because they're no longer seeking permission, they're leading themselves. Solitude is more than silence. It's a test of the self. Can you sit with your thoughts without reaching for distraction? Can you face your fears without someone to hold your hand? Most people can't, but the ones who can, they unlock a kind of strength that can't be faked. They become less reactive, more thoughtful, less impulsive, more grounded. They're not easily swayed by panic, pressure, or popularity, because they've already been through something harder, the raw stillness of their own mind, and they came out stronger. And in today's world, that kind of grounded solitude is becoming more and more rare. We live in a time that rewards constant connection, always online, always available, always reacting. It's easy to forget who you are when you never step away from the noise. The scroll never ends. The feed never sleeps. And the silence? We've been taught to fear it. But silence isn't empty, it's where truth starts to speak. When you unplug, when you truly disconnect, you begin to see what's real and what's just noise. And suddenly the world feels different, clearer, calmer, more honest. Depth has become rare. And in a world obsessed with speed, distraction, and surface, depth stands out. People who can sit with their thoughts, move slowly, think carefully. They're not just unusual, they're valuable, because they're not caught up in the race. They've stepped off the track entirely. And from that quiet place, they can see what others miss. While the world rushes, they notice, they reflect, they understand. And in that stillness, they become the kind of people others turn to. Not because they shout the loudest, but because their silence carries weight. In solitude, something else begins to happen. You start to hear a voice you may have ignored for years. Your own. Not the version shaped by expectations. Not the version reacting to opinions and trends, but the real you. The one waiting in the quiet. With no one left to impress, you start asking better questions. What do I believe? What do I value? What do I truly want? And when the answers come, they don't come loud. They come steady. That's the power of stillness. It teaches you to stop performing and start listening. Schopenhauer once wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." It sounds extreme until you try it. Because when no one's watching, you stop pretending. You stop chasing status, applause, or belonging. And in that space, you begin to build something real. Not a reputation, but a foundation. One that doesn't shift with the crowd or crumble under pressure. A self built from the inside out. And in a world where attention is currency, the person who no longer needs it is free. When the world fades out, something deeper fades in. Focus, the kind that isn't rushed, the kind that sees clearly. In solitude, your attention stops scattering. It sharpens, it settles. That's when real creativity begins. Not just doing more, but doing what matters. Because without distractions, your mind goes deeper. You follow thoughts to places most people never reach. And in that quiet depth, breakthroughs happen. The kind of breakthroughs that change the way you think, create, live. You don't need to fit in to create. You don't need applause to build. The person who thrives in solitude learns to lead themselves. They're not following the crowd. They're building something the crowd hasn't imagined yet. And once you've done that, once you've built in silence, made hard choices alone, stood your ground quietly, You no longer fear standing apart, because now you know your strength was never out there. It was always within. People who can be alone don't need to be told what's possible. They create their own possibilities. While others wait for permission, they take the first step. Not because it's easy, but because they've learned to trust themselves. That kind of trust is rare. It doesn't come from applause or approval, it comes from silence. From reflection, from choosing your own path again and again, even when no one else sees it yet. And when you live like that, your actions carry weight. You don't need to shout. You don't need to prove. You simply move with purpose, and that speaks louder than noise. Schopenhauer called solitude the fertile ground of genius. He believed only in quiet, away from ego, distraction, and constant chatter, can the mind truly unfold. Because genius doesn't grow in crowds. It grows in stillness, in space, in the freedom to think without limits. That's why solitude isn't just an escape. It's a catalyst, a place where raw thoughts take root and become something timeless. History is filled with people who didn't just tolerate solitude. They embraced it. And from that stillness, changed the world. Emily Dickinson lived most of her life in quiet seclusion, rarely seen, rarely heard. Yet her poetry pierced through the silence and spoke to the soul of generations. Kant barely left his hometown, living a life of strict routine and solitude. But within those quiet walls, he reimagined the very foundations of modern philosophy. Beethoven lost his hearing, and with it the noise of the world. But in that silence, his music only grew louder, more profound, more eternal. These weren't loud voices in crowded rooms. They were steady minds, alone with their thoughts. And that's where their greatness was born. They show us something simple but powerful. You don't need a stage to make an impact. Sometimes you just need silence and the courage to listen to it. Thoreau didn't run from the world. He stepped away from it. 2 years alone in a cabin by Walden Pond. No distractions, no noise, just trees, thought, and time. And from that stillness came Walden, not just a book, but a blueprint for freedom, clarity, and inner peace. These lives aren't just stories from the past. They're reminders that solitude doesn't shrink a person. It sharpens them. Not everyone who walks alone is lost. Some are just walking ahead where it's quiet enough to hear their own direction. They didn't fear disconnection. They embraced it. Not as loneliness, but as liberation. An invitation to slow down, go deeper, and come back stronger than before. And maybe that's what real strength is. Not volume, not popularity, but a self so grounded it doesn't need the world's permission to move forward. Schopenhauer saw solitude not as a weakness, but as a mark of depth. He believed that the more profound and thoughtful a person is, the more likely they are to walk alone. Not because they dislike others, but because few truly resonate with the way they see the world. In his view, solitude was sacred, a space where the constant noise of craving, competition, and distraction begins to fade. And when that noise fades, something else rises. Clarity. He wrote that most people are driven by what he called the will, a blind force of desire that pushes us to chase status, pleasure, and approval. But in solitude, we begin to see that chase for what it really is. Endless, exhausting, and empty. That's why stepping away from the crowd isn't retreat. It's insight. In silence, we're no longer pulled by every whim or trend. We stop running and we start understanding. And to Schopenhauer, that was the beginning of true inner freedom. Schopenhauer believed that solitude isn't just peaceful, it's transformative. Because when you spend enough time alone, something powerful happens. You stop being a slave to the outside world. You're no longer ruled by what others want or what society tells you to chase. You begin to see how much of modern life is just noise, designed to keep you distracted, dependent, and easy to control. But someone who's learned to sit in stillness becomes immune to that. They're not chasing likes, praise, or validation. They've found something steadier inside. And that's what makes them dangerous in the most meaningful way. They can't be easily manipulated. They're not driven by fear or craving. They've built a center that doesn't shake when the world gets loud. In solitude, they've faced themselves, their doubts, their darkness, and survived. Now they move through life not to impress, but to understand. And people like that are rare. So how do you live alone without feeling lost? It starts with changing how you see solitude. Most people treat it like a punishment. But the truth is, it's a tool, a mirror, a place to build strength from the inside out. Instead of fearing the silence, you learn to use it. You use it to reflect, to grow, to reconnect with your own voice. And you stop looking for constant company, because not all company is nourishing. Some of it is just noise in disguise. You find new companions, books that challenge you, ideas that stretch you, art that speaks to something deeper. You stop chasing shallow connection and start searching for resonance. Not many people, just the right ones, even if they lived centuries ago. Because sometimes the best conversations aren't with people in the room, but with the minds that left behind their truth in pages, in paint, or in thought. And through that, solitude becomes rich, never empty. The key is not to reject the world, but to build an inner world strong enough that you're never dependent on it. You don't need to share everything with everyone. Not every insight is meant for the crowd. Depth, by its nature, is selective. You begin to share yourself with intention. In the right moments, with the right people, not out of fear of being alone, but from a place of quiet strength. And that's when solitude becomes a gift, not a burden. It gives you space to build something rare, a mind that thinks clearly, a heart that isn't desperate, a soul that knows its own weight. When your inner life is full, the outside world becomes optional. Not something you escape, but something you engage with on your terms. Solitude doesn't isolate you. It prepares you to show up in the world without losing yourself in it. You don't need the world to understand you. What you truly need is to understand yourself. That's the quiet truth most people spend a lifetime avoiding. They chase approval, applause, belonging, forgetting that none of it matters without inner clarity. Solitude clears the noise, it strips away performance, and what's left is you. Not the version shaped by pressure or expectation. The real one, the steady one, the one that can stand alone. When you can sit in silence and feel at peace. When you don't need an audience to feel alive, that's when something shifts. You're no longer chasing, you're becoming. You're not just surviving loneliness, you're being shaped by it. And that's when the world starts to feel different. Not because it changed, but because you did. Loneliness isn't a weakness. It's the soil where strength, creativity, and self-respect grow. If you're willing to stay long enough to see it bloom. Because the person who learns to walk alone eventually stops needing the path altogether. They make their own. If you're in that place now, learning to be with yourself, learning to think, to feel, to grow without noise, you're not falling behind. You're becoming dangerous in the most beautiful way, because you're becoming someone the world can't shake. So don't run from solitude, use it. Let it shape you, sharpen you, center you. And when you're ready, share what you found in the silence. The world needs more voices that come from depth, not volume. If this message spoke to you, consider subscribing and leave a comment about your own journey through solitude. We read every word. And remember, you're not alone in your aloneness.